Hey there. Ready to dive into some serious business strategy today? You mentioned you like to cut to the chase, so let's get right to it. Today's deep dive is all about understanding one of the most popular tools in the business world, Porter's five forces. By the end of this, you'll be analyzing industries like a Wall Street pro. I'm so glad to have our expert here to help break it all down.
It's great to be here.
So, I think what's really cool about Porter's five forces is that it's not just some stuffy academic theory.
Right.
It's a framework that can be applied to pretty much any industry out there, from
Yeah.
tech giants to your local bakery.
Absolutely. Any industry, any size, it's all about understanding the competitive landscape.
And that's key, right? Because understanding these forces can make or break a company's success, or at least their bottom line.
Yeah, it's like a game of strategy. You need to know the lay of the land to come out ahead.
Totally. Now, I'll admit, I remember learning about Michael Porter and his five forces back in school, but it didn't really click for me until I started working and saw these forces playing out in the real world.
Oh, for sure. Seeing it in action definitely makes it stick.
So should we jump into those forces? First up is the threat of new entrants. Sounds pretty straightforward, right? How hard can it be to figure that out?
Well, it sounds simple on the surface, but it's a bit more nuanced than that. It's not just about new companies entering a market, but how easily they can do it.
I see. So it's more about the how than the if.
Exactly. Think about it this way. Starting a new business. You could open a coffee shop, or you could try to launch your own car company.
I'm guessing those two paths aren't equally difficult.
Not quite, and that's because of barriers to entry. These are the factors that make it tough and costly for new companies to enter a market.
Right, like needing a ton of cash up front or dealing with regulation.
Yes, exactly. Think of trying to launch that car company. You'd need massive factories, navigate complex supply chains, and tons of government regulations. It's a high barrier to entry, like a fortress protecting those big car manufacturers.
Okay, that makes sense. But what about my coffee shop dreams? Is that fortress as intimidating?
Well, for your coffee shop, you'd need some startup capital, of course, but it's a much lower bar to clear compared to the car company.
Yeah, you're not exactly reinventing the wheel with a coffee shop, are you?
Exactly. That's why understanding these barriers to entry government policies, the need for huge economies of scale, even just getting access to raw materials can be a make or break factor.
Whoa, hold on. Economies of scale, that's one of those businessy terms. What is that again?
Oh, it's actually a simple idea, but it's huge in the business world. Basically, it means the more you produce, the cheaper each unit costs.
Okay, so like buying in bulk. The more you buy, the lower the price per item.
You got it. Now imagine a huge clothing company producing thousands of shirts.
Hmm.
The cost per shirt for them is way lower than someone sewing them at home, right?
Oh, for sure. So that cost advantage is a major barrier if you're a smaller company trying to compete.
Exactly. It's like a built-in advantage for the big players.
So barriers to entry can really shake things up for businesses trying to enter a market.
They sure can.
And that's just the first force. We've got four more to explore, each with their own twists and turns. But let's move on to the second force, which gets into the whole power dynamic between businesses and, well, us.
The customer.
Yeah, the people they're selling to.
It's all about buyer power, right? What's the deal with that?
So this force boils down to leverage. How much influence do customers have on the prices they pay and the terms of the deal?
So, like, are they calling the shots or just going with the flow?
Kind of. If buyers have a lot of choices and can easily switch between companies, they've got a lot of power. Think about it like negotiating with a used car salesperson.
Oh boy, here we go.
If you're the only one on the lot that day, they're more likely to give you a good price. But if the lot's packed, you're just another face in the crowd. Your bargaining power goes way down.
So it's all about who needs who more, right?
Exactly. The more options buyers have, and the easier it is to switch, the more power they have. It's funny because it seems like common sense, but I don't think I've ever really thought about it quite like that before. Now, what about the suppliers? They have to have some power in all of this, right?
Oh yeah, they definitely do. We can't forget about the suppliers. That's where our third force comes in, supplier power.
Right. It's all about who's holding the cards in the business world.
Exactly. So how much power a supplier has really depends on how essential their product or service is and how many other options a company has.
So, kind of like a monopoly situation.
Well, not always a complete monopoly, but you've got the right idea. If there are only a few suppliers out there providing something businesses really need, they've got the upper hand for sure.
Okay, that makes sense. Got any real-world examples, something everyone can relate to?
How about the semiconductor industry? Remember that whole global chip shortage a while back?
Oh, yeah. Wasn't that messing with everything? Cars, phones, everything?
It was a mess, and a lot of it came down to supplier power. You see, only a handful of companies make those chips, so they were in control. They could set prices and terms, and everyone else was stuck.
Wow. So that was a real-life example of supplier power in action. And it makes you realize how important all these different players are in the business world. We've got the new companies trying to get a foothold, the customers making demands, and the suppliers calling some of the shots.
It's like a big balancing act.
It really is. So what else do businesses need to worry about? Is there more?
Oh, yeah, there's one more big one. Let's say you're a business, and you've managed to navigate those first three forces. You're feeling good.
You're on a roll.
Right. But then, bam, something new pops up, a threat you weren't even thinking about, the threat of substitutes.
Substitutes. Like substitute teachers. I hope we're not going back to school already.
Haha. No, not quite. We're talking about products or services that might not be direct competitors, not in the traditional sense, but they can still steal your customers because they offer a way to fulfill the same need, maybe in a different way or at a different price.
Okay, I think I get it. Got an example.
Think about traditional taxis versus ride-sharing services like Uber or Lyft. Back in the day, those apps weren't considered taxis, but they provided a substitute for the same service, getting from point A to point B.
Oh, that's true. And those apps definitely shake things up in the transportation world.
They sure did. And that's the big thing about substitutes. They can come out of nowhere and disrupt entire industries. And the threat is even bigger when it's easy and cheap for customers to switch, low switching costs.
So businesses can't get too comfortable. They need to be ready for anything.
Exactly. It's like that saying, adapt or die, right?
Your words have never been spoken, especially in the business world. All right, so we've got new companies, customer power, suppliers flexing their muscles, substitutes waiting to ambush. Anything else?
Oh, yeah. We can't forget the last force, competitive rivalry.
That one sounds intense.
It can be. This force looks at how fierce the competition is within an industry. Are companies constantly fighting for customers, dropping prices, launching crazy marketing campaigns? That's high rivalry, and it can get pretty crazy even for us as consumers.
I feel like I've seen some industries where companies are constantly battling it out. Airlines, maybe. Especially those budget airlines.
Yes, perfect example. Airlines are notorious for intense rivalry. You've got a bunch of factors that create that kind of environment. One is just the sheer number of airlines, all similar in size, going after the same customers.
So it's like a feeding frenzy.
It's a good way to put it. And when there's not much difference between the airlines or their services, they resort to things like price wars or advertising blitzes to try to get ahead.
It's like a race to the bottom
You
sometimes.
said it. So when you've got tons of similar companies, slow growth, and customers who can easily switch airlines, well, things can get pretty cutthroat.
That definitely paints a vivid picture. So, airlines, we got fast fashion. Anything else come to mind?
Oh, how about streaming services these days? They're in a constant battle for subscribers.
It's like a battle royale out there for some of these industries.
hmm
And they've got to keep up or risk getting left in the dust.
That's the thing about high rivalry. It pushes everyone to innovate and stay sharp, which is ultimately good for us, right? Lower prices, better services.
Yeah, it's a double-edged sword sometimes.
Ah.
Okay, so we've covered a ton of ground here. From those barriers to entry to that cutthroat competition, it's really eye-opening to see how these five forces shape the business world.
Right. It's like a masterclass in strategy.
Totally. But before we wrap up, are there any, misconceptions about Porter's five forces we should clear up? Things people often misunderstand.
That's a good question. One thing I see a lot is people thinking the goal is to find an industry with super low forces across the board. The less competition, the better, right?
Yeah, it does sound nice. Guaranteed profits. Who wouldn't want that?
Well, sure, it sounds great in theory, but the real world is messy. Industries are constantly changing. What looks safe today could be totally different tomorrow. Think about what happened when digital camera came along. Bye-bye, film industry.
Oh, man, that's true. It's like Blockbuster all over again.
Exactly. My point is, you can't just find a safe space and assume it'll always be that way. It's more about understanding those forces and being ready to adapt.
So being able to roll with the punches and pivot when needed makes sense. So for our listeners who are like, all right, I'm ready to analyze, what's a good starting point?
We'll start with something familiar. Think about industries you see every day. What are the barriers to entry? Who seems to have more power? The buyers or the suppliers? Are there any substitutes lurking around?
It's like becoming a business detective.
Exactly. Have fun with it. The more you use this framework, the more those patterns will jump out at you. Who knows? You might even spot an opportunity to shake things up yourself.
Now, that's what we like to hear. So we've gone from 0 to 60 on Porter's 5 forces today. From the basics to real-world applications, I feel like we've really cracked the code on this one.
Totally. It's all about giving you the tools to understand the ins and outs of the business world.
And hopefully have a little fun while we're at it. So to all our listeners out there, here's something to chew on. Next time you're ordering some takeout, booking a flight, or even just scrolling through your favorite streaming service, take a moment to think about those 5 forces at work behind the scenes. You might be surprised what you discover.